I'm Sammael. This is the very first episode of 50/50 where Sjmpson and I argue over all things Rocket League, while also pretending to know what we're talking about.
I'm Sjmpson, and Sam, you may be pretending, but speaking as someone who got 1 out of 10 of their SSL rewards last season, I think I know a thing or two about Rocket League.
It's 50/50, and this week in Rocket League, we see the end of an iconic duo. Kronovi announces his retirement, and the RLCS transfer window comes to a close. But first, we open with Rocket League Esports' long-awaited return to LAN. The first RLCS LAN in 2 years brought with it the debut for the Asia-Pacific and Middle East North Africa regions, marking the first time that players from 6 continents have a potential path for representation at Worlds. Does the LAN debut for the Asia-Pacific, Middle East, North Africa regions at RLCS Sweden solidify Rocket League Esports as a worldwide esport?
Sweden was a massive milestone. There's no denying that. However, I have to say Rocket League is not quite a worldwide esport just yet. Now, I give it 4 years before it's really fully reached that potential. In 4 years, we'll have a chance at another Intel World Open partnered with the Olympics with a proper LAN finish this time around, hoping all things go well. In 4 years as well, this game will have crossed that decade-long mark, and we'll likely have seen Unreal Engine 5 incorporated into broadcast assets. In addition, one major, it's not enough to fully judge the caliber of these international teams. And on top of that, these regions introduced still are missing some core regions like Morocco and also China. China having its own client and not being able to participate in the esport is alienating a large part of the population. And we just saw in League of Legends Worlds in 2021 that EDG was a Chinese team that won their world championship.
Yeah, we're almost there. It's a big step in the right direction, no doubt about that. It opens up the path, but it's definitely up to the players to walk down that path. Even the existing regions outside of the ones you mentioned that we don't have yet, we don't see the top teams that we necessarily see in NA and EU. Sandrock Gaming is definitely the example for me. They showed that they are deserving and certainly can play to that level, but after that, things really drop off. And if you're not in NA or EU, you're not getting the type of practice to get to that point either, so it's going to be really difficult for those teams to get there. I think that they will get there, but we got to see that consistency and parity across regions. You look at even a team like Tokyo Verdy, they were the best of their region coming out of APAC, and they just absolutely got squashed in Sweden. They were not good. So there's still a lot of ground that needs to be covered. We've got to close that gap more there on the skill side before Rocket League can truly be a worldwide esport.
Yeah, and you mentioned Sandrock Gaming showing up, and I got to add one final point. The esports shop that we just introduced with home and away decals is an excellent step in the right direction. But when we're missing teams as good as Sandrock Gaming in there, we're missing out on core opportunities to monetize this budget and get it to the global scale that other titles have. 725 days, or nearly 2 years, had passed between RL Esports LANs, with only 11 players who made an appearance at the RLCS 8 World Championship in Spain returning to the fall major in Sweden. In total, there were more rookies to RLCS LAN making their debut at 26 than veterans returning at 22. The grand finals pitted the all-rookie team BDS versus the all-veteran NRG, with the rookies on Team BDS ousting the veterans to take the major. In terms of impact, which group had the bigger performance overall at RLCS Sweden? Veterans or rookies?
It's got to be the rookies. The rookies had set the stage, like you said, came in with the majority of players into the major, and then coming out of the Swiss stage, they looked even better. They absolutely dominated that Swiss stage, and going into the playoffs, 2/3 of the players left were rookie performers. As we look at the best chance for the veterans, it was definitely NRG. They did what they could. They got to the grand finals, but they were completely outmatched once they got there and just looked really just kind of miserable against Team BDS at times. And even across teams, you go down to individual performers, and Joriez is that performer, as he was clearly the standout performer of the entire tournament, and he's a rookie as well. So, like I said, no matter how you really look at this, the rookies were better at Sweden, and it really wasn't even close, which for me is a sign of the times. It just shows that we're getting closer to that skill ceiling, and players are struggling to keep up.
Yeah, you mentioned Joriez, and I have one other name that comes to mind right away, Ahmad. Fantastic performance there, securing the goal that takes down G2 in that Swiss stage. And Ahmad, that goal, as well as a different save, had the top 2 clips of the major single-handedly. And it's hard to pass him up, especially when he came out of that winning the Saudi Esports Awards Rookie Player of the Year. Phenomenal performance from him, and like you said, Team BDS, it's a team of all rookies as well. And we had Seiko with 81.58% goal participation on a playoff caliber team at the major, and Archie on Semper, best player in a top 4 team, once again, the rookie. First Killer even was technically a rookie, and he was on the only team that was able to take down the team of rookies, BDS. And so yeah, NRG, only team of all veterans to make the playoffs. It's just not a good look for the veterans compared to how impactful the rookies were.
The Swiss stage of the RLCS Fall Major was a brutal series of matchups across 3 days, determining which 8 of the 16 teams would move on to the playoffs. At the end of the third day, G2 found themselves on the outside of the playoff picture looking in. Only 1 win shy of advancement, it's difficult not to point to a Day 2 loss versus Furia Esports as the reason G2 did not advance, where they were upset in a 5-game series and lost an extremely close OT in Game 5. Sjmpson, is the G2 loss versus Furia the biggest upset of RLCS Sweden?
I'm going to actually have to say no. The first day of RLCS Sweden had a ton of crazy matchups with results that I don't think anyone predicted properly. Pick'ems and the like were all thrown out, with brackets becoming completely unpredictable just on the first day alone. And early on in the group stage, I think the matchup of Renegades versus Endpoint was a bigger upset in the Swiss stage. Renegades, overall, their performance was pretty lackluster, and taking down a team that was able to make the playoffs that early on in the tournament was wild and unpredictable. Overall, we saw G2 fell a little bit flat to their full capability, and that has me thinking that Furia, they earned that matchup, even if that wasn't what people would predict going into the series.
All right, well, there was a number of notable upsets, so I'll give you that. But I think G2 versus Fury's got to take it. I mean, looking at all the teams that didn't make playoffs, so you've got the teams you'd expect to get there that didn't list. There's only a couple teams on that list, and G2's at the very top of that list for me. The only other team that missed worth mentioning is going to be Vitality, and their strength of schedule in the Swiss was just ridiculous compared to G2. I think G2 really kind of had a cakewalk if they had won this match. I mean, the opponent in the match, Furia, they only won a single series at Sweden, so this is the only match that they won. If G2 gets the job done here, Furia doesn't even win at all, and I don't think that would have surprised anyone. So for a team of G2's caliber, they got one of the best pedigrees in all of NA. This loss for me, just unacceptable, and the move to replace Dries really only further highlights that point. I think G2 also recognized that this was just an unacceptable loss.
Sticking with RLCS Sweden, we look to the grand finals, where Team BDS won over NRG in dominant fashion, 4-1, 4-3 in the second set. At one point winning 6 straight games and looking downright unstoppable. At the height of the losing streak, having dropped this first series and fallen behind 2-0 in Series 2, the mood of NRG players went from visible frustration and sheer disbelief to a much more casual demeanor. Afterward, Garrett G commented on the change in attitude, saying, quote, "I know there are gonna be a million takes saying that we didn't try. The only reason we took that to Game 7 is because we had fun," end quote. Was Garrett G right? Did this mindset calm the NRG players and ultimately get them back into the series?
Prior to the mentality shift, NRG definitely looked defeated, and rightfully so. They started the series 1-7 in the first 8 games. They only scored 9 goals total across those games, so it was not going well. So they shifted up, They decided to just take the edge off a little bit. They go full send as far as their on-field behavior. They're cutting each other off in the offensive zone, staying up too far, but it works out. They get a couple of goals at the start of game 3, and you could tell from player cams they maybe even surprised themselves a little bit. So I think from that perspective, change in mentality, it definitely helped to take the pressure off, but did it help them to get back into the series? I don't think that it did as much as it could have. They should have realized that when the pressure went off like that, they scored those goals. BDS switched up what they were doing too. NRG had more momentum than I think even they realize, and it's up to the coach behind them to allow the team to see that. Because for me, it's a fine line between having fun and accepting defeat. And some of the later goals in the series were getting laughed off, and really they shouldn't have been at that point. NRG was in that series, and they almost took themselves out of it.
Sizz and Garrett helped foster an environment that the players needed. There was not enough time to devise a new strategy against the pace and aggression of BDS, and comfort was a factor that was in their control. Would we have seen that if NRG didn't have their backs against the wall? Likely not. But does that mean that they were too loose? No, I think taking BDS to 7 in the second set was no small task for any team. It was made all the more impressive that they went from playing with their back heel to going toe-to-toe with this team. If anything, they didn't unwind soon enough. Squishy remaining stoic in the face of elimination is arguably part of his brand at this point, but he always finds a way to clutch it out. And at that point in time, BDS shut it down quite literally 80% of the time, and it just warranted an immediate change.
The conclusion of the fall split opened up the RLCS transfer window, and with it came one of the most volatile 3 weeks for North American rosters ever. 4 of the top 6 teams in NA made changes, including FaZe, G2, and Team Envy, all of whom made it to LAN. FaZe in particular being only 1 victory away from the grand final. Of all the teams in North America who made changes, which one exits the trade window most improved?
FaZe. It's got to be FaZe. And that's no slight at Illusion either. He was an absolute beast on LAN, but bringing in Sypical to make this powerhouse of a team is an absolutely insane move. And they arguably had their choice at player during this trade window with all the drama that went down. G2 Envy's swap is a bit closer than most people expect, and I think Dries is an excellent player that's just been stuck swimming upstream a bit, trying to prove himself, especially with how he was treated as a temporary after Rizzo's retirement and the leaks that went down from the G2 roster during a bit of a clunky trade that went down. I will say, though, it's worth noting that Oxygen did just make it through the qualifiers with Gimmick, and Krazix on the new KCP team did not quite make it through that day 3 gauntlet. And so there's an argument there that Oxygen here could be a step above where they were with Gimmick as well. It's going to take a little bit more time, though, to see how this plays out. It's going to take more than one regional as well to determine whether or not a team like that is truly the most improved. So once again, gotta say FaZe.
Can't be denied how good FaZe is now, and when you look at this, FaZe just isn't the most improved. They might be the best team in the world right now. That's just how good Sypical is. So no doubt it's FaZe. I think that's the obvious answer. And we look at FaZe, they know how good Space Station was with Sypical. I mean, everybody knows how good Sypical is, but FaZe barely beat them in the fall regional and then lost pretty handedly to them in regional number 2. So FaZe knew what they were doing here. And then on the other side, this isn't a move that Space Station wanted to make, I am sure. I don't have all the inner workings and have no real knowledge of the situation behind the scenes, but you got to look at Sypical leaving Space Station and think there's no way Space Station wanted to make this move. But you said it, FaZe, the power to come in, buy out a contract. They've got arguably 3 of the top 5 players in North America all on the same team, and that's just ridiculous. We're talking about a super team formed in NA, so it's FaZe, and everybody else they better watch out.
After 1,731 days on the same roster, the longest-standing duo in competitive Rocket League history, Torment and Gimmick, has come to an end. Gimmick's departure to Oxygen Esports completes one of the most storied tales in RL Esports, of 2 players whose dedication to both their craft and, more importantly, their team kept them in the limelight across multiple years and multiple thirds. It was this duo, along with Squishy, that put a stop to EU's run of 4 straight RLCS championships by winning RLCS Season 6 in Vegas. when they were the last hope for NA in the playoffs and dominated by European talent. Is Torment and Gimmick the most iconic duo in Rocket League history?
No, they're not, and that's only because of two players, K-Dop and Fairy Peak. These are two players who got together all the way back in 2017 with Mocket, and it's a road that diverged but eventually came back together. It's really a story tale into itself, as we have two players. They're with Mocket. They're in the Season 3 Grand Finals. They're just a runner-up there. It's looking really good, but the whole team just blows up after that. K-Dop goes over to Gale Force and Dignitas. We see what happens there. That's back-to-back championships for him. And then for Fairy Peak, he's trying to establish that other roster over in EU that's trying to compete. So it starts off with Pashy and Freaky, makes an upgrade. They get Scrub Killer, so they're getting even better, but still not quite good enough. And that's really because of K-Dop and what he's doing over on that side. What really stands out to me between these two players is when they're not together in RLCS, they are playing in PRL. So they're playing in community tournaments, and they're killing the 2v2s. They're winning every 2v2 that they enter. NA, EU, doesn't matter. They do that until they're basically bored of winning. That's how good they are. And so clearly that chemistry's there. And we see what happens. They get back together, and finally, Fairy Peak gets his first championship, and the storied tale is complete of two players who, to this day, continue to play together as that best duo in Rocket League history.
I guess there's a lot of dominant duos in Rocket League because I'm going to say no, but for different reasons. Garrett and Justin have been together for only one season shorter than possible based on Justin's age. And Rizzo and J-Naps will be revered long past Rizzo's retirement, which was arguably at a high point in his career. Both of these duos survived many evolutions of the game together, and I think Torment and Squishy could be argued as equally iconic to Torment and Gimmick, given their rise to fame on Iris with Lachinio, and the two of them grinding together hand in hand before they even achieved fame. Version 1 did not quite reach the same acclaim as G2 with Rizzo and J-Naps or NRG with Justin and Garrett, and Rat Enterprises was the team that Torment and Gimmick had to cement their legacy, and it didn't quite meet the caliber of these other duos. So I still love you, Gimmick. You're one of the most inspirational players in the game for me and always will be. I'm excited to see you on Oxygen, but I can't say Torment and Gimmick are the most iconic duo in RL history.
Oh, come on, don't try to suck up now. You said what you said. And moving on now from the end of an iconic duo to the end of the competitive career for one of the most storied players in Rocket League history. Kronovi has announced his retirement, citing a move to content creation and commentating. In the infancy of the game, when Rocket League was just a budding esport and most of the current pros weren't even heard of, he was the superstar. A figure as popular as the game itself, Kronovi sat alone atop the Rocket League world. The mountain. The bar for competitive Rocket League and the ones the fans showed up to watch. His presence will undoubtedly be missed in the competitive scene, but his lasting impact is undeniable. Does Kronovi's retirement officially signal the end of the original era of competitive Rocket League?
Yes, absolutely yes. He's the mountain. Think back to RLCS Season 1. Pull at your emotional heartstrings a little bit. This is the original world champ we're talking about. He took down the fierce competitors of Flipside Tactics with a substitute player. Kronovi got so many people into the game, myself included. He's an inspiration, and his retirement is going to be etched in stone. We now have a world champion team where every single player is retired. The game has come so far, and Kronovi was always alongside it, even if he was not always the face that he once was. His impact on the game, when it had to grow from nothing, was absolutely monumental. Kronovi retiring is right there on par with that Torment and Gimmick split up.
Is it the end of an era? Not yet. Not yet, Simpson. And that's because of one player, Garrett G. Until Garrett G retires, we're still in that OG era. I mean, Garrett G was in the first RLCS as well. He might not have won it, but he was there. And there's been a lot of firsts for Garrett G. Garrett is the first to play 100 series in RLCS. He's the first to play 1,500 career games in RLCS. And he's scored the first to do this 1,500 goals with a single team, all with NRG. The final piece for that, the final first that is just the most impressive stat for me across all of Rocket League esports, and that includes the 4-time. Garrett's the only player to make every single RLCS LAN. That streak is ongoing currently, and until that streak ends, we're in the original era. We thought we were in Kronovi's era. This has been Garrett G's era the entire time. This is Quick Chat, where we take tweets, we pick them apart, and we decide which Quick Chat in-game goes with the tweet best. So we'll start it off first with Justin on the inaugural Quick Chat. Justin says, I'm about to play controller on Sideswipe so I can shit on these other controller players who think they're good. Shit's so annoying.
Go for it. Sideswipe was made to support controllers, but it won't be at its full potential until you can queue by input, touch only, controller only, and open. We got another Quick Chat coming your way. Sunless Khan says, playing Sideswipe has made me realize that Rocket League desperately needs a flip reset indicator.
No way. Any modification that lowers the skill ceiling by providing information to the player unnecessarily is bad for the game. What's next? A mini-map? And we go over to Reddles now. Congratulations to the BDS boys for a crazy performance. Definitely the best team in the world right now.
Close one. I think BDS may be the best team in the world by a slim margin, EU and NA aside. I think the next major may have something to say about that, though. Keeping it short and sweet, it's Rocket Baguette saying EU greater than NA.
Take the shot. BDS just rolled NRG in the fall major, and EU has won 5 of 8 world championships. Now is the time. Take the shot, baby. Moving over to Fisher, ever the memer. Your soulmate does not play Rocket League.
Everybody dance. We all have our rocket husband, rocket wife out there somewhere. I'm having a little bit of trouble reading this name. I think I'm blocked. Thorin? Rocket League isn't esports. It's just soccer for moron zoomers.
Okay. But really, like, who is this guy? Because I've never heard of him. And as always, to end the show, we look back on an iconic moment in Rocket League and rewrite history. Because here, hindsight's actually 50-50. 3 years ago this month, after a disappointing last place finish at the RLCS Season 6 Finals, G2 made the move to replace Kronovi with Chicago on their starting roster. This would be the first benching of Kronovi's career, a tough blow for a player who had historically been the leader and most skilled player on every team he'd ever played for. Kronovi would go on to find a new home with Rogue, and the new-look G2 would become runner-up of the Season 7 Finals in New Jersey. But Simpson, what if, instead of replacing Kronovi, G2 had chosen to replace Rizzo instead?
A roster of Kronovi, JNAPS, and Chicago would have had some growing pains inevitably, but I think that this team would have found success. The parallel rise of Squishy in both content creation and the pro scene, and the critical lens of Kronovi being held to the standard of the best player in the world, meant that a slightly poor performance would weigh heavily on Kronovi's shoulders every time. Kronovi always played to live up to that standard for a pretty long time. He was trying to be innovative and aggressive in his playstyles, and that wasn't what was needed. By the time Kronovi did begin adapting into his second and third man role, his career was out of his hands and he was at the liberty of younger players forming rosters around the standings that he had built. And if you take a look at this trade at face value and just assume that Rizzo was then the player to go to Rogue and take Kronovi's place on Rogue, then you have Rizzo with FlyQuest's AJ and Wonder. So, theoretically then, Rizzo paired with AJ ultimately find First Killer as that Rogue pickup that does happen down the line. You have a pretty strong team right out the gates. But in my opinion, I believe this would have stunted AJ's growth as a professional player, missing out on the Knights, the Peeps, before his journey into that phase super team. Because of this, I think it would have potentially stunted the mechanics of NA slightly, and this would have allowed Kronovi the time that was needed to fill the shoes of a leadership position on one of the largest organizations in the world. He may not have been the immediate savior that Dries came to be years down the line, but just being surrounded by JNAPS and Chicago could have relieved some of that pressure that was always on him and allowed him to find that success that was needed with G2.
Well, after finishing in New Jersey, G2 was struggling. They go 2-5 in Season 8. They finish dead last. They miss LAN for the first time since Season 4. So there's question marks there already about kind of how things went down, despite their success in Season 7. Teams above G2 were already beginning to improve. We got Ghost with Mist, Rogue with First Killer. These are potential names for G2 that season if they want to make a move. But they don't. They stick with Rizzo despite this being an obvious chance for them to improve and try to bounce back. Despite not making a move there, they do bounce back in Season 9. When you look at their standings on paper, things went really well. They looked like the number 1 team in NA that season with no LAN. But honestly, they only go 6-3 in the regular season, and it's very deceiving that season. I think things were much more of a log jam. We don't really have that top team necessarily. And even though they take down the regular season champs in SSG, that series was ugly. SSG's defense that series was abysmal. Possibly the worst series that I've seen from SSG to date. So coming out of that, they're feeling good. They're the number 1 team in NA, so they don't make a move even then. But that was the time to replace Rizzo. Rizzo needed to be gone from that team during the summer of 2020 or before we get into RLCS X. We even see that with Drees coming in and replacing him. And that offseason was ridiculous. The number of players that G2 could have had that offseason is just stupid. And you got Reddles going to Space Station, Squishy going to NRG. Mist and Atomic stick together, but it's G2. They could have had either of those players. So who's that name I just said? Atomic. Who just joined G2? It's Atomic. So what does that mean? G2 could be the current roster they have right now, but they do it a year and a half earlier. 0 on the clock means game over. Until the next challenge, this has been 50-50.